It seemed like everything the auditor's office tried to accomplish, they met with obstacles. And part of the problem is because every single detail wasn't spelled out in the ordinance, and therefore it gave the EPD and the chief a lot of latitude to obstruct, like locking her out of the office or not providing, or deciding unilaterally, Lehner decided unilaterally to withhold a complaint, even though it's very clear what the charter says and what the ordinance said. Chief says he's supportive of complaint oversight. The last police chief said he was supportive of complaint oversight. Dennis Taylor said he was supportive of complaint oversight. The rank and file officers say they're, the union says they're supportive. The mayor says she's supportive.
So what's the hip thing to do here?
Council Ortiz, at this point, it would be politically not a good idea to say you're not in favor of police complaint oversight. So everybody's in favor. But there are different, not all police oversight is created equally. Right. And Dennis Taylor wanted police oversight, but he wanted it under the control of the city manager. There are councilors who keep saying they're in favor of it, but they're also in favor of it under the control of the city manager. They may be in favor of the idea of oversight, but it's the devil in the back room that's writing the details, and that is the issue. So, I'm in favor of police oversight, but I'm going to lock the police auditor out of the office. Therefore, she has to beg in order to get any material, and if she wants a file, we're going to make her copy it by hand. So that's a person who says they're in favor of police oversight. This ballot measure has passed by an unprecedented margin.
65% plus.
85% of the registered voters voted.
Yeah.
And 65% of them supported it. Right. And that far surpasses the support that people have showed for anything else. And you would think that the next sound you heard was council voting to implement it.
Right.
It's very clear what the authorities are via the charter. But the next move the council made was to, if you want to get back to those provisions, I fully expected the city attorneys to produce a document for council saying, okay, this is what you need in order to implement the authority that is vested in the police auditor now by the charter. This is what you need to do to bring the old ordinance up to the new standard of the new charter amendment. And they refused to do that. I asked them point blank to do that. So I just took a stab at it, and it was a draft, and fully intended it to have another work session and a public hearing before we adopted. But it seemed like it was pretty should have been pretty simple and straightforward, without the help of, without any assistance, or with the actual, I think, resistance of the attorney and the city manager. The next thing I knew, that we heard that there had been a meeting in Kitty's office with Andrea and the police chief, and I think the DA.
This was a couple days after that.
This was after the November 10th meeting when people looked at those provisions. They said, well, these all look pretty good. Bring them back with some commentary from the lawyers, and we'll have another work session before we go to a public hearing. And then I heard on Friday before the 17th meeting that Andrea was pulling her support, and then I heard that there was this meeting that they had, and then at the 17th meeting was when they created the committee. This has not only been stalled, but they've got this huge committee process to dilute the authority. And the troubling aspect of that is it's not a broad-based representation of the public. It is extremely heavily weighted with insiders and police. What they were saying was, well, we're hearing from so many people that we need broader public support on this. I don't know how you can get broader public support than a vote.
65%.
And it was a very well debated issue in the public. The one primary value in the police oversight system was that the police would no longer be policing the police.
Yeah.
That the system needed to be so independent of the chain of command that it couldn't even be under the city manager, because the city manager is the supervisor of the police chief, and that is the same chain of command. Because internal affairs still they still are in charge of the investigation. Although the charter, and especially the new charter, gives broad authority to the police auditor to oversee that investigation, including participating in interviews and
You're
determining
saying
when
last November,
yes.
because there's some real resistance in that. I was at the police commission.
That is the nexus of the resistance.
Right.
That is really
it in a nutshell.
That is really the center, or the only significant power that the auditor has. And it is what is at the crux of all of this. They want to keep the auditor away from the investigation. The police department doesn't want the auditor to have that. You know, it's been presented in the press, especially the Register Guard, everything is worded in a way to make it look as if the controversies come from the police auditor.
Yeah.
But the police auditor's only power is to make things public. Transparency is what the auditor function is all about.
Yeah,
so when there's difficulties with the police department, council is the boss. Police auditor goes to council. That's public. That's why it's public. So that makes not only the council accountable to the public, because now the public knows there's problems and they want them to do something about it. But it also lets the public know what's going on. But it does mean that there are going to be controversies out in the public, which is an anathema to the city administration. They don't want any bad PR at all. So that's all going to get blamed on the auditor. Authority that's listed in the charter are the minimal authority that the council is required to grant to the auditor's office and the civilian. That's the minimum. Those have to be granted. It gives, because it says included but not limited to, the council can go further.
Right.
The council could consider giving discipline, the ability to weigh in on discipline and recommend discipline. Right. The council could create an appeals process. The council could do a lot of things. They're being responsive to the police department. There's a huge amount of pushback from the city manager, the attorneys, and the police department. And people are very sensitive to that, and not people, but elected officials are very sensitive to that. Some of them are just sensitive to it. Some of them are just completely unwilling to do anything that the police don't want them to do. When I got on council, it became very apparent that the attorney's office has much more influence over policy making than the city council. Because if the city council came up with something that they felt they wanted to do that was maybe inconsistent with the direction the city manager was going in, so frequently the attorneys would corral us with, well, if you do that, you know, there might be litigation, or there could be, you know, it could be challengeable. You don't want to do that. And there were many cases of that where, as soon as the attorneys weighed in, I mean, the councilors were just unwilling to go against the attorney's recommendation. I am not attached to those provisions. I am attached to the idea of implementing fully the authorities that are granted to the police auditor's office via the charter.
Like the voters thought we were going to get.
Just like the voters wanted.
Yeah.